If you are just finding this story, you need to go back to part 1, because what is about to happen in this video will not hit you the way it is supposed to hit you unless you understand where it started. Welcome to Soul of Africa, where African hearts and Korean souls meet in the most emotional love stories ever told. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. We have so many more stories waiting for you, and every single one of them hits deeper than the last. It started with a mafia boss named Jinho, who lost his wife and did not know how to survive that loss in front of his daughter. A man who responded to grief the only way powerful men know how, by trying to control the next thing. He lined up 5 of Seoul's wealthiest women and told his 7-year-old daughter to choose a mother, a fashion designer, a corporate lawyer, a socialite, a K-pop star, and a woman in deep red named Bae Chae-rin, who wanted the Kang family for reasons nobody at that table fully understood yet. And his daughter Sora, small and watchful and carrying a worn stuffed bear that had belonged to her dead mother. She walked past every single one of them. She walked past the diamonds and the designer dresses and a 37-page laminated development plan. She walked the full length of that dining room, and she stopped in front of the woman standing at the sideboard with a water pitcher. A 29-year-old woman of Nigerian and Korean blood named Amara Diallo, who had come to Seoul with nothing and had spent 3 months quietly leaving flowers on windowsills and feeding stray cats and crying alone on a rooftop terrace and getting back up without complaint. Sora took her hand. She said, "I choose her." And the room stopped breathing. And under the table in the silence that followed, Bae Chae-rin's fingers moved across her phone screen. One message, fast, sent. That was where part 1 ended. This is where the damage begins. Fade to black. The sound of Seoul traffic at 3 in the morning, distant, relentless. The city that never fully sleeps, pressing against the glass of the penthouse like it is trying to get in. Amara was awake. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in the small staff bedroom at the back of the penthouse, the room that the house's architecture had decided was sufficient for the people who kept it running. It was clean and adequate, and it had a window that looked out at the building next door rather than the city. And she had made peace with that distinction on her first day, and had not spent a single moment resenting it since. She was practical about space. She had lived in smaller. But tonight the room felt different. Tonight it felt like the walls were listening. She had not slept. She had not tried to sleep. After the dinner, after Sora had taken her hand in front of 5 women and a mafia boss, and said, "I choose her," with the calm certainty of someone 3 times her age, Amara had been excused by Mrs. Cho with a look that communicated a paragraph of disapproval in 3 seconds, and she had come to this room, and she had sat down, and she had stared at her own hands for a very long time. She was still staring at them. She could still feel the warmth of Sora's fingers, that small, absolute grip, the way it had asked nothing and offered everything at the same time. And she was terrified. Not of Sora. Never of Sora. She was terrified of what the room had looked like from where she was standing when it happened. 5 women turning in their seats. 5 faces rearranging themselves around a shock they had not planned for. And one face in particular, the woman in the deep red dress at the near end of the table. The one with the jet black hair and the sculpted cheekbones, and the smile that she had closed like a shutter the moment Sora started walking. Chae-rin's face had done something in that instant that the others had not. The others had shown surprise, or hurt, or the particular wounded pride of women who had not expected to lose. Chae-rin had shown something colder, something that assessed rather than felt, something that did not ask, "Why did this happen?" but instead asked immediately, clinically, "What do I do about it?" Amara had seen that face before. Not on Chae-rin specifically, but she had seen that particular expression on people who had decided that an obstacle needed to be removed rather than understood. She had been on the receiving end of that expression before, in other rooms, in other cities, in other versions of the same story that followed her across every country she had ever tried to belong to. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. She told herself she was reading too much into a dinner that was already too much. She told herself to sleep. She told herself tomorrow would be manageable. She was wrong on every count. Quick cut, hard light, morning. The knock on her door came at 7:45. Not Sora's knock. Sora knocked with two small fists in a specific rhythm that Amara had learned to recognize through 3 months of proximity. This knock was one hand, flat, 3 times, official. She opened the door. Mrs. Cho stood in the hallway in her full uniform, her hands folded in front of her face set to the expression Amara had learned to read as the bureaucratic neutral of someone delivering a decision they did not make and will not explain. In her right hand was a white envelope. "Mr. Kang has asked me to inform you," Mrs. Cho said with the measured flatness of someone reading from a script they have memorized precisely to avoid having to feel anything while delivering it, "that your services are no longer required, effective today. There is 1 month's salary in the envelope and a reference letter from the agency. You will please have your room cleared by noon." The hallway was very quiet. Amara looked at the envelope. She looked at Mrs. Cho's face, which had still not made direct eye contact, which was a choice that communicated something Mrs. Cho would never say out loud. "I see," Amara said. "I am sorry," Mrs. Cho said, and then, so quietly that Amara almost missed it, she added, "This is not my decision." Amara took the envelope. "I know," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Cho." She closed the door. She stood in the middle of her small room and she held the envelope and she breathed the way she had breathed at many closed doors in her life, steadily, through the nose, counting to 5, not because counting to 5 solved anything, but because it reminded her body that it was still standing. Then she sat down on the bed and opened the envelope. The reference letter was standard, professional. It said nothing specific about why her employment had ended. The salary was exactly as stated, 1 month, precise to the one. And underneath both of those documents, clipped to the back of the envelope where Mrs. Cho may or may not have intended her to find it, was a small, folded piece of paper. Amara unfolded it. It was not from Mrs. Cho. It was not from Jinho. It was a printed email, 3 lines. Sent at 11:47 the previous night, less than 2 hours after dinner had ended. The email was addressed to the National Immigration Service of South Korea. It reported a foreign national working in Seoul on an improper visa classification. It included her full name, her Nigerian passport number, her current residential address, this room, and a claim that she had obtained her employment position through fraudulent documentation. None of it was true. Every piece of her paperwork was legal, verified, and agency certified. She had been meticulous about all of it because she had known, from the moment she decided to stay in Seoul, that meticulous was the only way a woman like her could exist in a system that was always looking for a reason to say she did not belong here. But truth was not the point. She understood that immediately. The point was the process. The point was the phone call that this email would generate, the investigation that would follow, the weeks of uncertainty and appearance at offices, and the kind of bureaucratic grinding that drained a person of time and energy and money they did not have to spare. All of it designed not necessarily to succeed, but to make staying too costly to be worth it. She set the paper down on the bed beside her. She was quiet for a long time. Slow zoom on the printed email lying on the white bedsheet. Then she started packing. What Amara did not know, what she could not have known from inside that small room with its window facing the wrong direction, was that she was not the only person in that penthouse who had not slept. Jinho had been in his study since the dinner ended. He had not gone to bed. He had not changed out of his suit. He had sat at his desk in the dark with one lamp on, and he had done something he almost never did. He had sat without working, without his phone, without papers, without the machinery of productivity that he used to keep himself from having to think about anything that could not be solved by a spreadsheet or a command. He had sat, and he had thought about the dinner table, about the walk, about the sound of small feet on marble in a room that had gone completely silent, about the expression on Sora's face when she stopped in front of Amara, not triumphant, not defiant, just settled, like a child who had been looking for the right door in a long, dark hallway and had finally found it simply by following the warmth under the frame. About the expressions on the 5 women's faces, about Chae-rin's hand moving under the table. He had noticed it. He noticed everything. That was a survival skill he had built so deep into himself over 20 years that it operated below the level of decision. It was just how he saw rooms, how he read people, how he had stayed alive in an industry that ended the people who stopped paying attention. He had noticed Chae-rin's hand. He had filed it in the part of his mind where he kept the things he was not yet ready to address, but was not going to forget. By morning, he had moved it out of that file. He was reaching for his phone when the knock came at his study door. It was Uncle Tae-sung. 7 in the morning, already dressed, which meant he had been up longer than Jinho had assumed. He came in without being invited, the only person who still did, and he sat down in the chair across the desk, and he put both hands on his knees, and he looked at Jinho the way old men look at younger men when they are about to say something they wish they did not have to. The agency called 20 minutes ago, Tae-sung said. Amara Diallo has been reported to immigration by an anonymous third party. The report was filed last night. Jinho was very still. The agency is concerned about their liability. They want to distance themselves quickly. Mrs. Cho has already delivered the termination letter on your behalf. A pause. She believed she was following the appropriate protocol. She believed I ordered it, Jinho said. Yes. Another pause. The kind that held a great deal. Who filed the report? Jinho asked. Tae-sung's jaw tightened slightly. We are working on that. Work faster. Jinho. Tae-sung leaned forward. His voice dropped, not because he was afraid of being heard, but because this was the voice he used when he needed the other person to hear the weight behind the words, rather than just the words themselves. Last night your daughter made a choice that nobody in that room was prepared for, including you. The women who were passed over are powerful, connected, and, at least one of them, willing to move quickly. Whatever you decide about Amara Diallo and her position in this house, you need to understand that last night was not just a dinner. Someone at that table made a decision that has nothing to do with a 7-year-old girl's feelings and everything to do with something much older and much more dangerous. And until we know exactly what it is, everyone inside this penthouse is exposed. Jinho looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Where is Sora? Still sleeping. And Amara? Packing. Something moved behind Jinho's eyes, brief, almost invisible. Stop her, he said. Tae-sung raised an eyebrow. Don't let her leave until I've spoken to her, he stood. And find out who made that call, all of it. The email, the source, who they spoke to before they sent it, and who they spoke to after. I want a name by this afternoon. Tae-sung studied him for a moment. Then he nodded and stood and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. Without turning around, he said, For what it's worth, your daughter has better instincts than every person who sat at your table last night combined. He left before Jinho could respond. Quick cut. The hallway outside Amara's room. Tae-sung was not fast enough. By the time he reached the staff corridor and knocked on Amara's door and opened it at her quiet come in, she was already done. The room was almost exactly as it had been when she arrived. Everything returned to its original position, the bed made with the corners tucked with the precision of someone who refused to leave disorder behind, even when disorder was being done to them. Her single large bag was on the bed, zipped, ready. She was standing at the small desk writing something on a piece of paper. Mr. Kang requests that you wait, Tae-sung said. He wants to speak with you. Amara looked up from the paper. She looked at Tae-sung's face, and she read it the way she read all faces, carefully for what was underneath the words. What she found there was not cruelty. It was not bureaucratic indifference. It was something more complex. The expression of a man who had been in service to power long enough to know when power was doing something it should not, and who was uncomfortable with it, but would not be the one to say so first. With respect, she said, I have been terminated. I have been reported to immigration by someone who does not want me in this building. I don't think it is a good idea for me to wait. The report was not filed by Mr. Kang. Amara looked at him steadily. I know. Tae-sung paused. You know. Someone put the printed email in my termination envelope. She said it without drama, without accusation, just fact. I don't know if that was intentional or an oversight, but I know who filed that report, and I know why. And I think Mr. Kang probably knows too, if he took 10 seconds to think about what happened last night. Taesung was very quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Please wait." She looked at her bag. She looked at the piece of paper on the desk, still unfinished. Then she looked at him and she said, "I'll finish this first." He left her to it. Slow zoom onto Amara's hand moving across the page. We cannot read what she is writing, only the careful deliberateness of it, the way someone writes when each word is being weighed before it is placed. What she was writing was not an explanation. It was not a complaint or a protest or a list of grievances addressed to anyone with authority. What she was writing was a letter to a 7-year-old girl, and it was the hardest thing she had written in her life, because she was trying to explain departure without teaching abandonment, and she was trying to offer comfort without making a promise she could not guarantee keeping. She wrote, "You did something brave last night. I want you to know that I saw it, even if no one else in that room understood it the way I did. I want you to know that whatever happens next, wherever I go, you were not wrong. You are never wrong when you trust what you feel. Your mother gave you that. Don't let anyone take it from you." She folded the paper. She wrote Sora's name on the outside. She left it on the desk where someone would find it and know it needed to reach her. Then she picked up her bag and went to wait. Fade to black. Then slow fade in. A different room. A bigger room. The meeting between Jinho and Amara took place in a sitting room that was neither his office nor the dining room. A neutral space, which Amara understood was a choice he had made intentionally, and which told her something about how he was thinking about this conversation. There were 2 chairs, a low table, morning light coming through a half-open curtain, the city below moving at its regular speed, indifferent as always. He was standing when she came in. He did not sit until she did, which was also a choice, and she noted it. She sat. He sat. He looked at her directly, and she looked back at him the same way, and they regarded each other for a moment as what they actually were. 2 people who had been living in the same space for 3 months and had never once had a direct conversation. "The termination letter was issued without my instruction," he said. "I understand. The immigration report was not filed by anyone in this household. I know who filed it." He looked at her for a moment. Bei Che-rin, it was not a question. He already knew. She could see it. He had known before he came into this room. He had probably known since he saw her hand move under the table the night before. He was saying it out loud to establish that it was a shared understanding rather than a theory. "I believe so, yes," Amara said. A silence. Jinho's face was doing its usual thing, presenting nothing. But Amara had spent 3 months in close proximity to this household, and she had developed, without intending to, a finer calibration for reading the specific quality of his silences. This one was not the silence of a man deciding what to say. This was the silence of a man who had already decided and was testing whether he was right to have decided it. "I want to be honest with you," he said, "about why I'm asking you to stay." Amara said nothing. She waited. "My daughter chose you," he said. "I don't fully understand why. I have been trying to understand it since last night, and I have not managed to. What I do understand is that Sora has not made a single choice in the past 2 years that I could not trace directly back to something real. She does not act from impulse. She acts from observation. Whatever she saw in you, she saw it the way she sees everything, completely." A pause. "I respect that, even when it inconveniences me." Amara looked at him. "And does it inconvenience you?" she asked. "My staying?" The question was direct. Too direct for most conversations with Kang Jinho. She knew that. She asked it anyway because she needed the real answer, and she had learned, in 29 years of living between worlds that did not quite claim her, that the most dangerous thing she could do was make decisions based on an answer someone was being too careful to give. Jinho looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Yes, it complicates a great deal. The women who were passed over are not women who accept that quietly. You saw what happened in 12 hours. There will be more." He held her gaze. But my daughter has been quiet for 2 years. Last night she was not quiet, and I am not willing to take from her the first thing she has reached for with both hands since her mother died." The room was very still. Outside, Seoul continued at its indifferent pace. A siren, a car. Somewhere below the window, the ordinary sounds of a city that did not know or care what was being decided 40 floors up in a room with a half-open curtain. Amara looked at her hands in her lap. Then she looked at him. "I'll stay," she said, "but I need you to understand something." He waited. "I am not staying for the job. I was not staying for the job before any of this happened. I am staying because your daughter is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met, and she asked me, in the only way a child can ask something that large, to not be another person who disappears." She paused. "So I will stay. But I am not willing to be managed out of this household a second time by people who are not you. If I am going to be a target, I need to know that the person in this house who has the power to protect me has decided to use it." Jinho looked at her for the length of a full breath. Then he said, "I've already made that decision." "When?" "When I read the immigration report at 6 this morning and made a call to someone who will spend the next 24 hours finding out exactly what Bae Chae-rin is hiding and who she is hiding it with." He stood. "Which means I need you to stay inside this building for the next 24 hours. Can you do that?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Good." He moved toward the door, then he stopped, and without turning around he said something that cost him more than it appeared to. "My daughter is a very good judge of character. She always has been. I should have been paying closer attention to who she was watching." He left. Amara sat in the quiet room for a moment. Then she unzipped her bag and took out the first thing on top, a small folded piece of cloth, the kind you keep because someone who is gone once touched it, and she held it in her hands and she breathed. Quick cut, hard light, the other side of Seoul. Bae Chae-rin's apartment was everything the Kang penthouse was except warm. It was higher, newer, more deliberately impressive. The apartment of a woman who had spent her entire adult life in proximity to money without ever fully being the source of it, and who had decided at some precise point that the only solution to that proximity was possession. Pale walls, pale floors, everything expensive and cold and chosen for effect rather than comfort. She was on the phone. She was wearing white silk, which was also a choice. The choice of a woman who had woken up at 6 in the morning and immediately put on something that made her feel like she was winning. She stood at her window with the Seoul skyline behind her, and she spoke in the low, even voice she used when she needed to be taken seriously without appearing to try. "It was filed last night," she said. "The agency will distance themselves. Without agency backing, her documentation becomes questionable, regardless of its actual validity. The process alone will take weeks." A pause. She listened. "No, I don't need it to succeed. I need it to be expensive enough that it's not worth fighting." Another pause. Her jaw tightened slightly. "Because a 7-year-old girl's dinner table decision is not going to be the thing that ends this. Not when there are legal mechanisms that cost nothing to initiate and everything to defend against." She hung up. She stood at the window and she looked at Seoul, and she was quiet in the way of a person running calculations. Then she picked up her phone again and she pulled up a number she had not used in 8 months. A number that did not belong to a lawyer or a contact or anyone in the world Kang Jinho knew she moved in. A number from a different world, an older one, the world that existed in the space between the legitimate businesses and the ones that never saw the inside of a tax office. She stared at the number for a long moment. Then she put the phone face down on the glass table. Not yet. That was a door she could open later. For now, the immigration report would move. The agency would distance itself. And without a clear employer of record and a clean immigration status, the maid who had walked out of a kitchen and into a mafia boss's future would have much larger problems than a dinner table. What Chae-rin did not know, could not have known, was that someone had already been sitting in Jinho's study for 45 minutes by the time she made that call, with a laptop open and a phone in each hand, pulling threads from the previous night's digital activity across the city's cellular network. And one of those threads led directly to a number registered to a subsidiary of an organization that Jinho knew very well. an organization that was not supposed to have any connection whatsoever to a woman who had been sitting at his dinner table as a romantic prospect. The thread was thin. But in Jinho's world, thin threads were not dismissed. They were pulled. Fade to black. Then slow fade in. Softer light. Different energy. The morning was almost over by the time Sora appeared. She came down the main staircase in her school uniform. She had gotten herself dressed, which she always did on mornings when she woke early and decided the day had already started without her. And she walked into the kitchen with her bear under one arm, and she sat at the breakfast table, and she looked at the place where Amara usually stood in the morning, at the counter near the kettle, humming something while the water boiled. The counter was empty. Sora looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Mrs. Cho, who was at the other end of the kitchen managing the household's morning inventory, with the focus of a woman who had decided that the best response to an emotionally complicated morning was to count things. "Where is Amara?" Sora asked. Mrs. Cho did not look up. "Amara is resting this morning." Sora was quiet. Then, "Why?" "There are some administrative matters being handled." "What does that mean?" Mrs. Cho looked up then. She looked at the child at the breakfast table, small and straight-backed and looking at her with those enormous dark eyes that saw everything and accepted the abridged version of nothing, and she set her clipboard down. "It means," she said carefully, "that the adults are handling something and it will be resolved." Sora looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at the empty counter by the kettle. She ate her breakfast in silence. She did not ask again, but she also did not go to school. She told the driver she had a headache, which was the first lie Sora had told in 6 months, and she went back upstairs to her room, and she sat on the floor with her bear, and she thought. She thought about the dinner table, about the way the room had gone quiet when she took Amara's hand, about the expression on the woman in the red dress, the one whose smile had closed so fast it was almost like it had never been there, about the sound of Chaerin's chair shifting at the exact moment Sora started walking, about the way the women had watched her with expressions that all said different versions of the same thing. This is not how this was supposed to go. And then she thought about something smaller, something she had not mentioned to anyone because she had not fully processed it until now. Last night, after the dinner, when the guests were leaving and the staff were clearing the table, and she was being guided to bed by one of the junior housekeepers, she had come back downstairs for her bear, which she had left on the dining room chair. The lights were already low. Most of the staff had gone. She had come through the side door quietly, and she had seen Chairin in the hallway, not leaving, standing, her back to the main corridor, her face to the wall of family photographs, her phone already to her ear, speaking very quietly and very quickly in a tone that was entirely different from the warm, careful voice she had used at the dinner table. Not angry exactly, but certain. The certainty of a person giving an instruction rather than having a conversation. Sora had taken her bear from the dining room chair and gone back to bed without being seen. She had not known what the phone call meant. She had only known that the voice was wrong, that it belonged to a different person than the one who had sat across from her and asked what she liked to draw. She sat with her bear and she thought about all of it. Then she got up. She went to her desk. She opened the third drawer, the one where she kept the things she considered important and private, and she took out a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote 3 sentences in her careful, large child's handwriting. She read them back to herself. She folded the paper. She was going to her father's study when she passed the staff corridor and saw Amara's door was slightly open. She stopped. She pushed the door open carefully. Amara was inside. Her bag was on the bed, not packed, Sora noticed immediately, but not fully unpacked either, sitting in between. Amara was at the small desk with her hands folded on the surface, looking at nothing in particular, and she looked up when Sora appeared in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The morning light through the small window made the room feel like it existed slightly outside of the rest of the house, quieter, more honest. "Are you leaving?" Sora asked. Direct, no preamble. The question of a child who has already decided that the only way to survive the answer is to not make it worse by approaching it sideways. Amara looked at her. Not today. But maybe? A pause. The pause of a person who could have said no and chosen not to, which was its own answer. I don't know yet, Amara said. There are some things happening that I don't have full control over. Because of last night, Sora said. Yes, Sora came into the room. She did not ask permission. She sat down on the edge of the bed near the half-packed bag, and she put her bear on the bed beside her, and she looked at Amara with those large, careful eyes. Did I make it worse for you? She asked. By choosing you? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Amara felt it in her chest, the specific pain of hearing a 7-year-old child ask whether her love caused damage. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. No, she said firmly. Not the gentle no of someone managing a child's feelings, but the flat, direct no of someone stating a fact they will not allow to be qualified. What you did last night was the bravest and most honest thing I have seen a person do in years. You do not apologize for it. You do not take it back. You do not wonder if it was wrong. It was not wrong. Sora looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Then why is your bag on the bed? Amara opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, quietly, with the kind of honesty that adults almost never give children, and that children almost always know they are being denied. Because the world is not always kind to people who make honest choices, and I am trying to figure out how to stay without making your life harder. Sora was quiet. She looked at the bag. Then she looked at Amara. My life is already hard, she said. It was hard before you came. It was harder when you weren't in the hallway that first day. She paused. I don't need you to make it easier. I just need you to not disappear. Amara looked at this child, this 7-year-old person with her worn stuffed bear and her large ancient eyes and her absolute honesty, and she felt something move in her chest that she was not going to name right now, in this room, because if she named it she would cry, and she had promised herself she was done crying in this penthouse. I'm not disappearing, she said. Sora nodded once, as though the matter was settled. Then she slid off the bed, picked up her bear, and walked to the door. She paused. There's a note, she said. On the desk. I found it. Amara looked at the desk. The letter she had written, the one she had left before she thought she was leaving, was still there. She had forgotten it in the chaos of the morning. You can keep it, Amara said. I meant all of it. Sora looked at her, something in her face that was very close to the expression she wore when she put her bare face up on the table, open, present, decided. Then she picked up the note, folded it carefully, and put it in the pocket of her school uniform. She left, and Amara sat in the quiet room and she looked at her half-packed bag and she thought, what am I doing? And then she thought, I know exactly what I am doing. And then she unzipped the bag and she started taking things back out. Slow zoom on the bag being unpacked, item by item, a decision being made in reverse, quick cut, a different kind of silence. Jinho's study, late afternoon. The man Jinho had put on the task that morning was named Park Sung-min, and he was 31 years old, and he had been working intelligence for the Kang organization for 6 years, and he had never once in those 6 years brought Jinho a report that was incomplete. He came to the study at 4 in the afternoon, and he put a folder on the desk without being asked to sit down, and he stood with his hands behind his back, and he said, The immigration report was filed from a device registered to an administrative account belonging to Bae Chae-rin's personal assistant. The call was routed through a third-party service to avoid direct attribution. Standard protocol for someone who knows how these systems work. He paused. It was not the only call made last night. Jinho opened the folder. He read. He turned a page. He read further. His face, as always, gave nothing, but his hands, which rested flat on the desk, had gone very slightly still in the way they went still when he encountered information that required a recalibration of his understanding. Tell me about the Shin connection, he said. Park Sung-min took a breath. Bae Chae-rin has been a personal associate of director Shin Hyun-woo for approximately 4 years. The relationship is personal and financial. He funds a portion of her lifestyle through 3 shell arrangements, none of them traceable without the level of access we have. In exchange, she operates as an informant and occasionally as an access point, introductions to individuals in Shin's target social circles. Another pause. Sir, your dinner was not a coincidence. She was placed in your consideration process. The room was very quiet. By whom? Jinho said. It was not a question. We believe the original introduction, the person who recommended her as a candidate, was Min Ji-won. Jinho looked up from the folder. Park Sung-min continued, his voice steady. Min Ji-won has a business debt with the Shin organization, a large one, outstanding for 14 months. We believe placing Chae-rin in your household was a partial settlement arrangement. Min Ji-won provided the introduction. Chae-rin handled the rest. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which a very controlled man is managing something very large without letting it show. Jinho closed the folder. He aligned it with the edge of his desk. He looked at it for a moment with an expression that was entirely unreadable to anyone who did not know how to read it. But Tae-sung, standing near the window, knew how to read it. He had seen that expression twice in 20 years. Both times it had preceded something that the other party had not recovered from. The other three women, Jinho said quietly. Hana, Sung-hee, Ra-eun. Not connected to Shin. No evidence of coordination with Chae-rin or Ji-won. Park Sung-min hesitated for just a moment. However, Oh Sung-hee received a call this morning from Chae-rin, lasting 11 minutes. The content of the call is not available to us, but Sung-hee's office filed a motion this afternoon with the Labor Tribunal related to foreign worker documentation standards. The filing references no specific individual, but the language is precise in ways that would apply directly to Amara Diallo's employment classification. Jinho was quiet for a long time. So in 12 hours, he said, they have initiated an immigration complaint, a potential labor tribunal action, and we now know that one of the 5 women was actively placed in my household by a rival organization as an intelligence and access asset. He looked at Park Sung-min. And my daughter chose the one person in that room who had no agenda whatsoever. Park Sung-min said nothing. There was nothing to add. Get out, Jinho said, not unkindly, the way he said it when he needed to think without an audience. The door closed. He sat alone in his study with the folder on the desk, and the late afternoon light coming through the window, and the sound of Seoul below him doing what Seoul always did, moving, pressing, indifferent. He sat for a long time, and he thought about a 7-year-old girl who had sat at a dinner table surrounded by plans and agendas and social performance and intelligence operations dressed as romantic candidates, and had looked past all of it and found the one person whose only agenda was a lullaby through a cracked door. He thought about what that meant about his daughter, and then, because he was Jinho, and honesty with himself was the one currency he had never been willing to devalue, he thought about what it meant about him, that he had almost let it cost her. He picked up his phone. He dialed Tae-sung. I need 2 things, he said. First, I want Amara Diallo's immigration status reviewed and reinforced at the highest level we can access. Not tomorrow, tonight, whatever it costs. A pause. Second, I want a meeting with Director Shin Hyun-woo arranged for the day after tomorrow. Not his office, somewhere I choose. Another pause. And tell Park Sung-min that when I said find everything, I meant go back 4 years. Every contact, every transaction, every introduction. If Chae-rin has been in rooms she should not have been in, I want to know which rooms. He hung up. He sat for a moment. Then he did something he had not done since before his wife died. He got up from his desk. He left his study. He walked down the hallway past the family portrait, not looking at it, not avoiding it, just passing it the way you pass something you are not yet ready to stand in front of. And he went to Sora's room. He knocked. She said, "Come in." She was on the floor in her usual position, back against the bed, bare in her lap. But there was something different about the room tonight. On her desk, visible from the door, was a piece of paper. A letter, folded and then unfolded again, placed carefully. He could see from the doorway that the handwriting was not Sora's. He sat on the edge of her bed. He looked at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Is Amara staying?" "Yes." She held his gaze to check if it was true. Then she nodded. "Are you going to protect her?" she asked. "For real, not just tonight." And there it was again. The question that cost him something because it required him to answer for all the nights before tonight, all the months of not looking, all the dinners and the plans and the process that had kept him busy and given him the feeling of doing something while his daughter sat on floors talking to a bear. "Yes," he said, "for real." Sora looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her school uniform and she took out a folded piece of paper, the note from Amara, and she held it against her chest the way she held her bear. Not offering it to him, just holding it. "She wrote me a goodbye letter," she said, "this morning, when she thought she was leaving." Jinho said nothing. But she didn't leave. Sora looked at the paper. She could have. Nobody would have blamed her. She looked up at him. "People who don't have to stay, Appa, when they stay anyway, that means something different than people who stay because they have to." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, sitting on the floor of a room full of things he had bought to fill a space he had not known how to fill himself, holding a goodbye letter from a woman she had known for 3 months like it was something that needed protecting. He did not have words for what he was feeling. He had never had words for the things that mattered most. That had always been his problem. "Good night, Soraya," he said. "Good night, Appa." He got up. He walked to the door. He paused. "She was right," he said. "What she wrote you, whatever she said, she was right." He left. He walked back down the hallway. He stood in front of the family portrait for the first time in months. He looked at his wife's face for a long time. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She had always known what he was thinking before he said it. He had always believed that was a quality that died with a person. He was beginning to wonder if she had found a way to leave it behind. Fade to black. And on the other side of Seoul, in a pale, cold apartment with a perfect view of a city she had spent 4 years trying to own one introduction at a time, Bae Chae-rin was getting ready for bed when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number was not saved. But she knew it. She knew the prefix. She knew the silence on the other end before anyone spoke. The specific quality of it, the weight of it, the message it sent before a single word was said. She answered. A voice said, very quietly, very evenly, "Director Shin is not happy." She was quiet. The operation at the Kang household was intended to be clean and gradual. 1 season. Build trust. Report from the inside. What happened last night at that dinner table has drawn attention to the association in ways that Director Shin finds unacceptable. A pause. He is giving you 48 hours to resolve your exposure and return to an appropriate distance from the Kang family. "I am not the one who was exposed," Chae-rin said. Her voice was controlled, but just barely. A child made a dinner table choice. If Shin considers that a threat to his operation, then his operation was not nearly as sophisticated as 48 hours, the voice said, and the call ended. She stood in her pale apartment in the Seoul night, and she looked at the dead phone in her hand, and she felt, for the first time in 4 years of careful, calculated work, the cold, specific feeling of being a chess piece rather than the person moving them. And somewhere in the recalibration that followed, the rapid internal assessment of position and exposure and risk that was as natural to her as breathing, she made a decision that she would not have made 24 hours ago. A decision that had nothing to do with Shin Hyung-woo, and nothing to do with the Kang family's political value, and nothing to do with 4 years of proximity to power without possession. She made the decision because of a letter. She had not read the letter. She did not know what was in it. But she had been in the hallway this morning, early, before anyone expected her back, a courtesy visit she had planned the night before to reinforce her position. And she had seen the look on Mrs. Cho's face when the housekeeper came out of the staff corridor. And she had seen, at the far end of the hall, a small Korean girl in a school uniform standing in the doorway of the maid's room, with one hand pressed against her chest over a folded piece of paper, her face wearing an expression that should not have been possible on a child who had been handed as much loss as this one. The expression of someone who had just been told they were worth staying for. Chae-rin had stood in that hallway, and she had looked at that expression, and something in her, something she had been very carefully not maintaining for a very long time, had cracked. Not collapsed, just cracked, like a seam in something that has been under pressure from the wrong direction for too long. She looked at the dead phone in her hand. She made her decision. You will not find out what it is tonight, but in 48 hours, in the next part of this story, Bae Chae-rin is going to do something that nobody at that dinner table, nobody in Director Shin's organization, and nobody watching this video right now is going to see coming. And when she does it, it will not feel like the move of a villain. It will feel like the move of a person who looked at a child pressing a letter against her chest and understood, for the first time in 4 years, that the thing she had been trying to take was never something that could be taken, only given. This story is not finished. It is not close to finished. Jinho now knows that 2 of the 5 women were connected to his most dangerous rival. He knows that his dinner table was a stage set, and that while he was conducting his careful process of choosing a mother for his daughter, his enemies were conducting a far more careful process of choosing a position inside his household. He knows all of this. What he does not know yet, what is still waiting in the part of this story that has not yet arrived, is the secret that Amara has been carrying since the morning she stood in that hallway and looked at a family portrait and felt a grief that did not belong to a stranger. That secret is not small. It is not manageable. And when it comes out, it will not just change how Jinho sees Amara. It will change how he sees everything that has happened from the very beginning. Subscribe. If you have not subscribed, do it now. Turn on the notification, because part 3 is where the secret comes out and it lands like a building coming down, and you will not want to arrive late to it. The story is just starting to show you what it actually is. Stay with it.